Good evening to all of you, our cherished viewers on TV3 and our listeners on 3FM 92.7 in Accra. This is Eye on the Seat with me, Winston Amwa. So, the Electoral Commission has been in the news following the disqualification of 12 political entities. Yes, the disqualification of 12 political entities because that of Akwesi Adairodike of the UPP is still in court. So, the Electoral Commission says, go and solve your problems. Once you're done, then we would take a decision on you. Now, as it stands, the Progressive People's Party's Dr. Papa Kwesi Indum, the NDP's Nana Akufo-Addo Agyeman Rawlings, the PNC's Dr. Edward Mahama, and the APC's Hassan Ayariga would not be contesting the 2016 elections. This evening, we'll look at the effect this would have on election 2016, as well as whether or not the Electoral Commission in itself was right in disqualifying all these candidates. Eye on the Seat is sponsored by TV3 Network and supported by Star Ghana. Star Ghana, strengthening transparency, accountability and responsiveness in Ghana. Thanks for staying with us. This is Eye on the Seat on TV3 as well as 3FM 92.7 in Accra. So my guests for this evening who say they have interesting positions, from my far left is Nane J. Bafwewa, who is a legal practitioner, and then Frederick Odru of the Institute of Local Government Studies. Nana and Frederick, good evening and thank you for joining us. So let me start off with you, Nane J. You say you have a very interesting position. Now, was the Electoral Commission right in disqualifying these candidates?
Good evening to your cherished viewers. First and foremost, I think that I wouldn't want to be part of the bandwagon who would chastise the EC, on a baseless ground. I think that their effort to ensure diligence and meticulousness in our political space should be commended. Nonetheless, I believe that it ought to be done in accordance with the law. Now, when you look at the EC, it's the creation of statutes. And being an administrative body created by statute, it cannot exercise any power which has not been vested in it by statute. And so when you look at our constitution, the High Courts and the Supreme Court have wide powers by way of what we call the prerogative rights, to ensure that where an administrative body acts outside of its mandate, that is to say, exercises a power which is not vested in it, they bring it to order, or where it fails to comply with its laid down procedure, they also take steps to bring it to order. Why is it so? It is to ensure that, as Article 23 says, no one acts in a manner which is arbitrary. Don't forget, we have a history. We are coming from a place where people acted in a manner which pleases them. So the Constitution sort of placed limitations on the exercise of powers, which particularly powers which are given by statutes, or powers which are vested in bodies that are created by statutes. And so therefore, they are required to act in accordance with the statute that created them and their powers for the purpose for which they were created. This particular activity of the EC is governed by the constitutional instrument, the CI 94, that is the Public Elections Regulations. Now, when you look at the Public Elections Regulations, one of the things you observe is that when you look at interestingly, it sets out the criteria for completion of nomination forms for parliamentary candidates at Regulation 6. Then it also sets out the criteria for completion of nomination forms at Regulation 7. But the interesting thing is that under no circumstance or nowhere is it stated that a person's failure to meet all these criteria will render his nomination invalid, or gives the EC the power to invalidate or disqualify such a person. That is the interesting point we are all missing. Nowhere it doesn't say so. It doesn't say that if you fail to meet the criteria as set out in Regulation 7, in relation to presidential candidates, you'll be disqualified. It doesn't also say that if you fail to meet the criteria as set out in Regulation 6 in relation to parliamentary candidates, you'll be disqualified. It never says so. Now, when it has to talk about people failing to meet the criteria, it calls it invalidation. And so when you come to Regulation 9 in particular, where it talks about invalidation, when you come to Regulation 9, Regulation 9, Sub-Regulation 2, this is what it says. The returning officer shall inform a candidate in case where a candidate fails to meet certain aspects of the criteria as set out in Regulation 7. This is what it says. That the returning officer shall inform a candidate that that candidate's nomination is invalid, where the particulars of the candidate or the person subscribing to the nomination paper are not as required by law, or the nomination paper is not subscribed to as required by law, and shall give the candidate an opportunity to make amends or any alteration necessary within the stipulated nomination period. But this is the most interesting part.
Yes.
When it is making reference to the point where the commission has the power to invalidate a nomination form, this is what the law says. Where a candidate fails to comply with Sub-Regulation 2, that is what I've just read. The returning officer shall consider the nomination paper of the candidate as invalid. That is the only time power is given to the Electoral Commission chairperson as returning officer of the presidential elections to say that your nomination paper is invalid. It is when you have failed to comply with Regulation 2.
Yes, but the EC says they give people in the parties a chance to correct the errors.
So you don't look at...
So in that situation, they would have complied with Regulation, Sub-Regulation 2 and 3.
Wait, you see, you don't look at all the parties, put together. You segregate them and deal with each one of them and ask questions as to whether or not the EC erred. Now, very, very importantly, Regulation 2 is the condition precedent to invalidation.
So you say the EC erred?
Let me finish.
Is
the condition precedent to invalidation. Unless, by virtue of its wording, unless you have complied with Regulation 2, you cannot invalidate. The fundamental question at this instance to making a conclusion as to whether or not the EC erred is to ask ourselves that in respect of each of the candidates, right, did the EC comply with Sub-Regulation 2? Because it is clear that where a candidate fails to comply with Sub-Regulation 2, the EC would invalidate.
The EC says some of those candidates submitted their forms late. By the time the EC did the checks and realized that there were errors in there, it was past the nomination period. And the law says within the stipulated nomination period, they couldn't have done that.
See, first and foremost, the point ought to be made that the EC's obligation, right, is mandatory. It is not discretionary. Okay? And so, therefore, you cannot say that simply because I did not have enough time, I could not perform my obligation. Don't forget, it is because of such reasons that Article 23 exists. The whole purpose of it is to prevent a situation where somebody can look at the face of Winston and say that I don't like your face. And so I will create a situation whereby it will not be possible for you to do something.
Hold on 1 minute. Yes. Frederick, what is your position?
My position is that we should not forget one thing. The date for election is time bound in this country. It's a constitutional provision. We remember not too long, we wanted to have a change in November, we couldn't do it.
But what has that date got to do with what's happening?
It's got everything to do
Such
because
as?
the EC's processes are time bound. because they must work towards meeting a specific date. It's very instructive that if you look at candidate 13 in the EC's Akwasiade Odike, technically he was not disqualified.
Yes.
But they could not make any pronunciation on his candidature until the court case relating to him has been dealt with. And they even gave him up to October 14th, incidentally today, to deal with the court processes. Otherwise, his nomination or his candidacy would not be considered. Meaning that after today, they are working within a time. I mean, they have some processes they must meet. They're going to do printing. They're going to do a whole lot of things. And they need to set a time frame within which they work. For me, where I sit, EC has outlined a number of issues. And here, on the specific instance of some of the issues we're talking about, we are talking about stipulated time. You are allowed to file your nomination within a specified period. Then we might as well say that the day before the election, as long as you want to contest, you can come in and say, I want to contest the election.
The law also says that you should give the people a chance to effect corrections within that stipulated time. It is only when they fail to do so
the stipulated,
that you would say
the stipulated time refers to the period of nomination.
Yes, but
the law,
when they
the
bring
law
it, the law says you should go through and then be able to tell them mandatorily that there are some errors in here, and so go and correct them. And if they fail to do so within the stipulated time, then you say based on this, and that's in sub-regulation
the stipulated time.
9.3.
Yes, 9.3.
No, the 9.2 that you read the 9.2.
If I
you
may,
see,
I'll get to it.
if
Yes.
you can just, you see, the point is that we are talking about the period of nomination. The period of nomination is not 24 hours. It's I think about 9 days.
9 to 12. I mean, on
it's
that
about
days,
9 days
it's
or so.
2 days. I mean, that was the period we were filing, but 9 to 12, 2 to 5 p.m. And that's it.
So the issue is that you could have submitted your nomination forms early, but you choose to look. It's funny, some of the stories you hear about candidates wanting to submit them early or wanting to submit it late. There's so many funny stories you hear. But the fact of the matter is that if you sincerely want somebody to help you, you come in time for the person to help you. The other points that I'm worried about, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not happy with particular parties not being on the ticket, because for me, they come on board with a lot. I mean, they generate ideas, and I've kept mentioning Dr. Mahama, Dr. Edward Mahama. I feel so sad because he is somebody, over the period that I've listened to, he's always generating wonderful ideas worthy of consideration. Whether he wins or not is another thing. But in this case, I am disappointed in the parties, because I believe the parties should have done more than they did.
But some would say, I mean, beyond the parties doing more than they did, the Electoral Commission also has a mandate of checking. And you see, I just want to read a bit of what the Electoral Commission itself said. Yes. And then it says, on submission of the forms by the nominees, the Electoral Commission is obliged under the law to check that the facts provided on the nomination forms are correct and that the forms have been properly signed by the required numbers of registered voters. It is after this that if you realize that there are any mistakes, then you would draw their attention, and then they get to do these questions. But we've been joined by lawyer John Ndebugri. He also holds an interesting position. Counsel, good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. So we're looking at how they were disqualified, and they've raised the point of the Electoral Commission not giving the political parties a chance to effect corrections as stipulated in Regulation 9 of CI 94. So that's what we're looking at now. Now, the parties base their argument on that fact and say that based on that, the Electoral Commission cannot disqualify them because it should have given them a chance to actually effect these corrections that the EC identified as errors.
I mean that all 13 are saying that they were wrongly disqualified. just because the Electoral Commission didn't invite them to come and correct what they admit are their own errors. Is that the position? Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I'm asking whether that is the position. That all 13 disqualified presidents are saying that simply because the Electoral Commission...
The PPP has raised that point. The NDP has also raised that point. And even, the UFP has also raised that point, as well as Kwame Walker, who's an independent candidate. They have all raised that point, that they were not giving a chance under Regulation 9.2 of CI 94. And I just would want to find out from you whether that is enough grounds.
This is what I think Regulation 9, Sub-Regulation 2, says that the returning officer shall inform the candidate that the candidate's nomination is invalid, wherein the particulars of the candidate or person subscribing to the nomination paper are not as required by law. Or B, the nomination paper is not subscribed to as required by law and shall give the candidate an opportunity to make amendments or any alteration necessary. Put emphasis on necessary. Any alteration necessary within the stipulated nomination period. These are the operative words in that sub-regulation 2B. And so you have to go back and find out how is a person's nomination paper to be subscribed to as required by law. Let's take one example.
Sure.
Where, the general provision or requirement is that a presidential candidate or a prospective presidential candidate must be subscribed, his or her nomination must be subscribed to by 2 registered voters from each district. And there are 216 districts. So a prospective presidential candidate, in order to qualify, will need the endorsements. I'll just use endorsements for the purposes of, brevity. We need 432 persons, registered voters, to subscribe to his or her nomination. If you have 431, you have not satisfied sub-regulation 2B, and therefore you will be disqualified. So let's take a person who has gone to Amenfi West and got 2 people to endorse him or her, and has gone to Amenfi East. And the same person who endorsed him or her in Amenfi West moves to Amenfi East and goes to endorse him or her. The person will obviously be shot by 1. So he will be disqualified. It has nothing to do with crime or anything. The thing is that you have not got the 430.
But, Honorable, sub-regulation 3 says, where a candidate fails to comply with sub-regulation 2, the returning officer shall consider the nomination paper of the candidate as invalid and shall A, endorse and sign on the nomination paper the reasons for the decision and inform the commission. What is seen here is that that is the circumstance under which you can disqualify that person when that person has failed to comply with sub-regulation 2.
Listen, I was even coming to that.
Go ahead and go to
it. In the case of the presidential election, who is the returning officer? The returning officer is the chairperson of the Electoral Commission. So when when sub-regulation 3 talks about informing the commission, it is referring to parliamentary candidates, not to the presidential, because the chairperson of the Electoral Commission is to report to which commission.
Honorable Ndebugri, the returning officer, yes, is the chairman of the Electoral Commission. There are other commissioners, and so she then, and if I can borrow the words of what Dr. Papa Kwesindum said when he met the chairman of the Electoral Commission, he said the chairman of the Electoral Commission recommended his disqualification,
No,
and she insisted that it was the whole commission that accepted his disqualification and endorsed his disqualification. So if anything at all, it has to be the entire commission to take that decision and not her. But sub-regulation 3 says this is the reason and this is the provisions under which you could be disqualified.
If I were to accept your line of argument, how would that avail the disqualified person?
Say that again?
Because it is the commission that decided, not the chairperson.
Exactly, that's the point I'm making. But even though, I'm saying that even though she is the returning officer, it was the commission that decided. And over here, it is just as the law says that then the returning officer shall inform the commission, just as she did. So the point is that it is where a candidate fails to comply with sub-regulation 2.
I don't get you.
I am saying that the law says where a candidate fails to comply with sub-regulation 2, that is the opportunity to effect those corrections, the returning officer shall consider the nomination paper of the candidate as invalid and shall endorse and sign on the nomination paper the reasons for the decision and inform the commission. Then the commission shall take a decision on the matter within 7 days. Okay, and that's sub-regulation 4.
Within 7 days that you are now worrying about. Within 7 days doesn't mean after 7 days.
Yes, within 7 days.
So within 7 days, it starts counting from day 1, day 2, up to 7.
Yes, but sub-regulation 3 gives you when you can disqualify.
For 7 days. So they did it within 7 days. So what is your problem?
No, but Honorable Ndebugri, sub-regulation 3 gives the reason, and that's the condition under which, somebody will say that is the sufficient condition under which you could disqualify a candidate. And it says that after that candidate has failed to comply with a chance giving that candidate to effect corrections, you shall deem his or her nomination as invalid. And the point the political parties are making here is that we were not given that opportunity, and so you cannot deem our nomination as invalid when that hasn't been met.
Given the opportunity, you cannot. That's why I said put emphasis on alteration necessary.
Alteration necessary.
You cannot invite people who have violated the law to correct their violation of the law. Look, when the law says clearly that one person cannot nominate more than one candidate, and you go and nominate endorse more than one candidate, you mean the electoral commission to call you to come and correct your criminal act? I mean, that is not the purpose of that sub-regulation. It's about clerical errors. You have spelled your name wrongly. You have given giving your telephone number, you may have mixed up numbers.
It doesn't state clerical errors here.
Not when you have acted in violation of the law.
It doesn't say that here.
When you have acted in clear violation of the law, don't nominate more than one person. You go and nominate. Don't go and recruit somebody who is not a registered voter to endorse you. You go and recruit a person who is not a registered voter to nominate you or to endorse you. All these are infractions. And I don't think that is what the regulation means by saying that you should be brought to correct your errors. You cannot be asked to come and correct your violation of the law.
So for you, the Electoral Commission is right by disqualifying these persons?
Of course. And for the first time, the Electoral Commission is trying to apply the law. I think that in the past, the situation has been so lax that people think that you can just go and say, I want to be president, and wasting everybody's time.
Honorable John Ndebugri, thank you for joining us this evening. We're grateful to you for your time.
Thank you very much for having me too.
Good. So that's Honorable John Ndebugri. And I still have an J. Bafwe with me, and I see him disagreeing with Honorable John Ndebugri. Now, he says that the law says that any corrections and alterations necessary, you cannot engage in criminality and expect the Electoral Commission to call you to come effect those corrections.
First and foremost, Winston, we must divorce our passions and emotions from this whole discussion. You see, not every one of us was happy to see about 18 people wanting to contest for the office of president. I mean, I wasn't happy. However, it is important to appreciate that once we have agreed to become a nation of laws, we must comply with the laws of the land. Now, Mr. Ndebugri was talking about the fact that errors which are not, errors which are not in conformity, or errors which are in breach of the law, it's not what the regulations anticipate. I'll read the regulations for you to see.
Okay, go ahead and read.
That's what it says.
But before you do that, Nana, you know what? I want us to go for a short break. Now, when we return from that break, we'll get into the details of what the regulation says. We need to, get the clarification in here. So we go for a short break, and when we return, we'll get into what the regulation says concerning who is in breach of the law and what corrections you are allowed to make before you are disqualified as a presidential candidate. Welcome back from the break, and thanks for staying with us. This is Eye on the Seat on TV3 and also live on 3FM 92.7 with me, Winston. I still have Nene J. Bafwe, a legal practitioner, and Frederick Odro, who is a governance expert with the Institute of Local Government Studies. So, Nene J, you're talking about what the regulation says. Yes, go on.
No, Winston, the regulation says, particularly sub-regulation 2, says the returning officer shall inform a candidate that the candidate's nomination is invalid. Where? So it is giving you the circumstance under which your nomination will be deemed to be invalid. And that is what the law is defining, what it means by invalidity under the CI 94. Anything beyond that, anything less than that, is not the law. Now, this is what it says. The particulars of the candidate, what are your particulars? Your date of birth, your hometown, whether you are married or whether you are single, right? Your religious subscriptions, and so on and so forth. Those are your particulars. Or the person subscribing to the nomination paper are not as required by law. So what is the legal definition, or what is the law in respect of the particulars of a presidential candidate? And what is the particulars as required by law of the subscriber or the person supporting the, endorsing the nomination form for the candidate? Now, so you look at it and say, this is what it is saying, that look, where your nomination forms, the particulars, is not as required by law, meaning if it is anything short of what the law requires, you'll be informed. And so it is not one which is only related to clerical errors. It is anything which is short of the law, right? And so if if the law is that I should write the name of my wife, my many wives, my many children, my hometown, my career or profession, and I have failed to do that, then it is not as required by law. If the law is that I should provide A, B, C, D details of the person subscribing to my nomination, then it is not as required by law. That is what the law is saying. So the EC would have to, the returning officer would have to inform me. Now, let's go further. It says that, or the nomination paper is not subscribed to as required by law. So the nomination paper, it is required by law to be subscribed in a particular manner. That is the number of persons who are supposed to subscribe to it and many other things. And so if it falls short of that, then it is inconsistent with the law.
But his point is the fact that if you realize, for instance, and in some cases the chairman of the Electoral Commission stated, you realize that the signatures are even different. Clearly, there's some bit of forgery in here. No. This is a crime.
Who makes that decision?
Do you allow that person who's engaged in this to do the corrections?
You see, when you interrupt like that, it becomes difficult because there's a lot for us to
educate. So go on.
You see, who makes that decision of forgery? It will interest you to note that even after the EC boss has made the returning officer has made his or her findings in particular with the presidential elections, that is the EC chairperson being the returning officer, she only says that she only has to certify that by virtue of ABCD I've invalidated it, and then she forwards her report to the commission to make a decision. This is an administrative body making a decision. In my humble opinion, they would have to hear the parties. How did you arrive at the conclusion that somebody has forged something? How? By yourself. You look at the paper and say that just because this is here, that is not there, the person has forged it. You need to give that person a hearing. Now, when you look at the regulations, the CI 94, it's a very flexible, very flexible legal document.
Yes, concluding
now,
get to Frederick.
Frederick raised the point that what if you presented your papers, 2 minutes before time? What we need to appreciate is this. The EC is the one that set the time and the period for nomination. The EC cannot make excuses for its failure to perform their obligation on the basis that there is no time.
In a minute, conclude and get to Frederick. Yes, we need to move to Frederick.
You cannot make excuses. You see, why would you want to be pardoned for your inability to perform your obligation? But on the other hand, the other person that did not have control over your activities, he should not be pardoned. I think that it is incongruous and unfair.
Okay. Yes, so Frederick, you heard from, Honorable Johnny Debugui, supporting your position. He believes that, look, the EC did the right thing, but Neneji still insists that the wrong things were done in them. Yes, what do you say to that?
You see, the key phrase here is within the stipulated nomination period. So you see, the time frame is within the nomination period. Now, let me give you an instance. Nana, you are a lawyer. If we look at the Statutory Declaration Act 1971, Act 389, if we look at the Section 3, where is this talking about if somebody is going to make a statutory declaration? One of the key requirements, your full name and your address. Let's look at somebody like Hassan Ayariga. I've heard him.
He says who doesn't know him.
He said who doesn't know him. Wow, I don't know him.
Sincerely. You don't know him?
No, I know him on TV, but I don't know him. I don't know where he lives. I don't know where he comes from. That is why there is a law.
He comes from Boko.
Oh, please. There is a law which requires you that if you want to declare who you are, you must give A, B, C, D. But then the catchphrase, within the stipulated nomination period. So the time frame is clearly given in the process.
But the law also says that you would disqualify me when I fail to make corrections that you have identified.
You see, everything we are talking about, even making of the corrections, must be within the nomination period. So if you fail to submit in good time for the correction, for the anomalies or the errors to be identified, for it to be corrected. For instance, if even on the day you come in, the very day, normally they give a time frame that you must submit by 5 p.m. If you submit by, say, 5 p.m., you are there. And there they see that you've made some errors and it's 5 p.m., you can't make the correction.
But at least they tell you this is the error you've made. And then so they tell you that this is the error you've made. Go and correct it. Can you?
Point
no,
is
you
that
can't. And then that's the end of your story.
We all saw the wonderful scenes that occurred on the day. People carrying sackloads of money to go and pay. When the stipulation says you must come in with you must go and buy a banker's draft for the payment, and somebody turns up with all these.
Because he says he couldn't have done the banker's draft. He's from Kumasi, so he brought the money. Cash.
The last time I checked, there were banks in Kumasi.
But he had to do it that morning. He couldn't have.
No, you see,
because he had to fly to Accra. You go.
Maybe you are playing the devil's advocates.
Of course, that's what.
That is why we are also saying that. You see, it's unfortunate. I keep making the point. It's unfortunate, but we also needed to weed certain chaffs from the system. I am not saying I'm happy with what has happened. On the day that the announcement was made, I think the day after, I was here in your studios, and I made mention of the fact that I was even still worried because we were awaiting the parliamentary candidacy of certain key. If it happens that a key person in a stronghold of the person's party is disqualified on such a basis, what could have happened? I mean, I shudder to think what could have happened.
Indum is cited unfairness because he says the CPP did not meet the 12 noon deadline for the submission of the banker's draft. For some reasons, that was accepted, but he was not even given a chance. And he also cites the example that the NPP has not submitted its accounts. The NDC submitted accounts late. The Political Parties Act says the Electoral Commission may sanction, or no, it says, may actually cancel the registration of these political parties. The Electoral Commission did nothing about it. He's involved in clerical errors, which could have been corrected, and he's been dealt with unfairly. Frederick, before I get to now.
You see, that is another part of my worry with the whole process is that the law is the law, but then this is politics, which plays very much on the emotions of the people. I am not too comfortable with the stance of the EC also when it comes to dealing with the political parties. You see, you can be very nice, you can be open to people without taking a specific hard stance. So I am not too comfortable with certain stance of the EC. But in this particular instance, all that I'm saying is that I believe, from my understanding of the process, I believe in terms of law, they are in the right. Okay. But then we are dealing with human beings. You make exceptions for people, or you make exceptions especially if it could be accommodated. Sometimes we need to also try to tone down on our stance and let us be more friendly in our dealings. Okay. Otherwise, it can also create its own size of the problem.
When you look at the antecedental dealings between the political parties and the EC, what you discover is that in the past, my understanding is that when you deliver your forms, then the Electoral Commission staff will go through the forms with you and point out to you the infractions of the law in your nomination papers, right? And so it seems to have created a certain reasonable expectation amongst them that, look, with this particular, with the EC, when you go, this is the routine, this is the procedure, and therefore, if anything comes up, you have the opportunity, like the law says. But in this particular instance, I stand to be corrected, but from what I have heard, it was as though you deliver your papers, then the EC will go through in your absence, okay? Now, for me, this is politics. And this is not law court. You see, it requires dialogue, it requires interactions. And so to enable you perform your obligations, if you know that an interaction or dialogue with the political parties or corporation would enable you perform your obligation, you do that. Okay? But you don't create a situation where you breach your fundamental obligation, which is a precondition to invalidation, and then say that we did not have time. That is the problem.
But you see, well,
I'm coming, my brother. Again, Frederick was making reference to chaffs in the system. My brother, who is happy with the many political parties? No. But the law empowers the EC, okay, to undertake certain processes which would make sure that some of the people who are not serious do not remain political parties. Okay. Have they done that? You fail to perform. See, again and again, it goes back to the EC failing to perform its obligation under the law, and then wanting to hold people by the scruff of their neck, okay, for they also failing to perform some things as required of them.
Sorry says, in their regard, we must point out that our client does not take over responsibility for correctly filling out the nomination papers of candidates only because the law requires the returning officer to draw their attention to statutorily non-compliant errors.
My brother, I mean, what he is saying, I think I would not say, I'm not here to challenge what he has said. I'm here to educate, because we are all lawyers. And I can't, I mean, he's a very respectable lawyer. I can't sit on this TV to say I'm poo-pooing what he has said or approving of what he has said. But in my humble opinion, what amount to invalidation is defined by law. The time when you can invalidate is also defined by law.
So do you agree with what?
I disagree.
You disagree with what?
I disagree, but I will not argue it. What I'm saying is that what does the law say? You see, the law is the standard by which we judge the actions and inactions of the EC.
Okay.
What does the law say in terms? Look, it is very worthy. It's worthy of note that nowhere in the CI 94 is the word disqualification used. Nowhere. It says invalidation. Then the commission will make a decision to disqualify or not to qualify. Look, there's one fundamental problem even with the CI, with the regulation, sub-regulation 4 of regulation 9. You see, when you are in a position to make a decision, in this particular instance, you can say I'm qualifying, I'm disqualifying, or I'm even waiving, or allowing you to regularize it. That is the exercise of this.
But the disqualification in here in regulation 9, sub-regulation 1, talks about disqualification.
I'm saying that disqualification in relation to failing to comply.
Yeah.
There's nowhere is it stated that if you fail to meet this criteria, your nomination will be disqualified. Nowhere in CI 94. What it actually says is that the commission will certify that by virtue of your failure to comply with regulation 2, we are invalidating it. Then he would refer it to the returning officer. Then he will refer it to the commission to make a decision. At that point, the commission will be exercising a discretionary power. The commission can say that for Winston, we are allowing him to go through. For Frederick, we are disqualifying him. For Nana, we are allowing him to go and regularize. That is an exercise of discretionary power. Now, on what basis or what goes into this decision, we don't know.
Yeah.
But even Article 296 requires of the commission that requires of all institutions created by law that exercise discretionary power to publish a guideline. In this particular case, when you read Tadiosoris' letter, he says that guideline is CI 94. But what he fails to realize is that when you look at the CI 94, it doesn't state categorically what goes into that decision. So the CI 94 is even deficient in terms of the exercise of discretionary power under sub-regulation 4 of regulation 9. So that in itself is even problematic. That is why I'm saying that this particular CI, right, is look, any challenge, I will not be surprised that most of the challenges will succeed. I will not be surprised. I mean, to use the word cautiously, most of the challenge will succeed. Because, for instance, I've just stated that when you relate sub-regulation 4, for instance, of regulation 9 to Article 296, it fails the test.
Okay, well, we need to be moving on, but I just want to get to you, Frederick, now, get to an area that you'd love so much. So, what would be the effect of this disqualification on election 2016?
Well, I think we are still not out of the woods, particularly when it comes to...
As it stands now, yes,
yes,
they've been disqualified.
When it comes to... No, I mean, one, there are two things. There is a good side and the bad side.
Tell me of the bad side first.
The bad side is that we're going to miss some people who could have generated wonderful ideas. And the good side is that it's a good riddance about certain people who were not, for me, quite serious.
Who are those who, for you, are not quite serious?
It would be unfair to sit on a national
but you
television.
said some people were on serious.
You
said some people were on serious, and those people have been disqualified. Some have been disqualified.
Winston,
so if you see somebody was on serious, it's just nice to tell us those who are on serious, so that the others who were disqualified can,
No,
say,
I can mention people who I'm sorry I'm not going to see them.
Who are those?
Papa Kwesindiom, I'm quite unhappy. He's not going to be there. I can mention Dr. Mahama, Dr. Edward Mahama every day.
And who else?
Well, I want to stick to these.
So the others good riddance?
No, there are others in there who might.
But you mentioned the good people.
Well, I want to mention them. Wednesday, I plead a faith. I'm very.
You plead a faith. Yeah. I'll let it go by there. Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm listening.
So that's for me is that. But still, I'm saying we are not out of the woods. We're still waiting for all the regions to talk about the parliamentary candidates, because again, we are only comfortable as of now because NDC and MPP are in there. And if any of these parties should suffer a casualty in the parliamentary elections, parliamentary candidacy, it can still bring about a lot of problems for us. But then going forward as a country, even beyond this election, we need to start looking at our systems and processes.
What about our systems and processes? Because
now we seem to be enjoying some level of peace because it is not NDC and MPP. I can assure you that if it had happened to any of these parties, we would have been in a lot of trouble. But let me also take this opportunity to congratulate the independent candidate, Jacob Osayeboa. I mean, he's surprised me because if parties I thought had resources and very good people and well-oiled machine to have sailed through the process failed, then I'm very worried. I mean, I think he's done very well to have sailed through within the stipulated time as others failed to do what he could do.
But Nana, how do you think this would affect the elections?
First and foremost, my fear really lies in the many suits that might drain the energies of the EC, making them unable to focus on the elections. Because don't forget that you've disqualified 12 candidates.
Yeah.
They probably might bring, all of them probably might bring an action in the High Court of Accra. And don't forget, we have various divisions of the High Court. So if we are unlucky for the Chief Justice in the exercise of her administrative powers to bring all of the suit to one court, then we are in trouble. The EC might be in trouble running around the court premises, from one court to another, instead of focusing on the elections. Now, if somebody decides not to come by way of judicial review but chooses to file a writ, then we are also looking potentially at injunctions.
Already the GCPP has talked about placing an injunction on it. That's
exactly.
Maurice Ampa, he says he'll place an injunction on the elections.
Then potentially we are looking at various injunctions that may hamper the election. But you see, my brother, there is an observation, and I think it is important for us to take it in our good stride, particularly the EC. And indeed, I would want to encourage the opinion leaders of this country not to sit down for things to go wrong before we say we are going to pray or we are going to talk to people. I thought that from the events of the 2012 elections, particularly the elections petition, would have learned some lesson to know that it is more of discourse instead of go to court.
Are you saying we haven't learned any lessons?
In terms of our dealings with the parties, not the reforms. Okay, in terms of our dealings with the parties, I think that it is too snobbish to say that go to court. Okay, go to court. Okay, I mean, even with the appointment of new EC boards, in recent times, apart from the election petition, there have been numerous court suits. So one would have thought that there would have been lessons to lift up or raise the discourse from, an EC that is so strict, because it's politics, and with politics, in as much as it has some relation with law, okay, it goes beyond it. It goes beyond it to, as I said, dialogue, frequent engagement with the political parties, okay? But to say, go to court, I don't think, look, if you imagine all the regions, for instance, I understand in Ashanti region, for instance, 24 parliamentary candidates were disqualified. Imagine all the 24 go to court. Do you know how much the EC is going to spend on lawyers? Imagine that the EC officials would have to be in every court instead of working. It's going to be a drain on the EC's resources. So that position, that countenance is not good for the EC.
Okay, finally, Nana, before I get to Frederick, your final comment.
My final comment is that the EC would have to change its game in terms of the interactions and its countenance. It is not helpful. It is one that, first, as I said, is going to land it in trouble in terms of waste of time, waste of resources. And I also think that the opinion leaders of this country should start shifting more to the middle and engaging the parties. Because, look, a party like the MPP went to court in 2013, okay? I'm not sure, and I don't know, as I said, if they might want to go to court again. And so
they won't go to court again.
They say they won't go to court again.
Yeah.
And so if you don't do things properly by engaging them, and then something goes wrong and they say they will not go to court, my brother, we know what politics has become in this country. It's become a matter of life and death for people.
Okay. Frederick, finally.
I hope sincerely there will not be too many court actions. But even if there are, my instinct tells me that courts will be very reluctant to disturb the cat.
Make sure you're not in contempt of court.
Well, I'm saying, well, we have previous experience. I'm not saying they will do anything underhand, but they might want to err more on the side of, ensuring the status quo remain, or there can be constitutional crisis on our hands. But then I sincerely agree with Nana's point he made concerning the need for better engagement between the political players, especially the Electoral Commission, which is the referee, must be seen as an impartial, and it must be more willing to accommodate some mistakes more than any other person, more especially when they themselves are not perfect.
Okay.
Because they've agreed they've made errors before. So you shouldn't punish other people when they make mistakes and still insist that even though you can make mistakes and you think it's okay for you to make mistakes.
All right, thank you very much, Frederick Odru of the Institute of Local Government Studies, and Aneje Bafu, who is a private legal practitioner. Thank you also for doing the viewing and the listening on 3FM 92.7. That's all from us this evening on Eye on the Seat. Well, in the meantime, on a lighter note, we're told that some of the presidential candidates, the failed presidential candidates, are not taking it easy at all. I've heard Maurice Ampal say that, the flag bearer of the Great Consolidated Popular Party, Dr. Henry Herbert Latte, can't actually have sleep, and that he would need help and all of that. That's all from us this evening. Eye on the Seat is sponsored by TV3 Network and supported by Star Ghana. Star Ghana, strengthening transparency, accountability, and responsiveness in Ghana. Winston, make sure you make a date with me tomorrow morning on Sunrise on 3FM 92.7, where we continue with a discussion of issues that matter to you. Have a lovely evening.